Scott sat on the edge of the couch, absently flicking through a magazine as the low hum of the city drifted through the open window. It was late and the quiet apartment felt colder than usual. He glanced over at Ashley, who was standing by the kitchen counter, her back to him. She was sipping from a glass of wine, her movements slow and deliberate, almost as if she was lost in thought. It had been a long day. The kind where nothing seemed to go right, another round of bills piling up, the reminder of family losses that still stung, and the quiet distance that had grown between him and Ashley over the past few months. They had been through so much together, financial struggles, the death of their parents, and the general weight of life. But recently, it felt as though they were just two people sharing a space rather than a life. They had been together for 8 years. 8 years of love, laughter, challenges, and growth. Yet something had shifted. Their once fiery passion had become an ember, dim and distant. The connection they once shared, that effortless intimacy, now felt like something they had to force. They both knew it. They just didn't talk about it. "Hey, Scott," Ashley said, breaking his thoughts. She turned to face him, her glass of wine still in hand, her expression unreadable. "Can we talk about something?" Scott put the magazine down, his brow furrowing in mild confusion. She rarely initiated deep conversations these days, and he could tell from her tone that this was different. It wasn't casual. There was a weight to her words that he didn't quite understand. He nodded, his heart already beginning to race a little faster than it should. "Of course," he replied, his voice steady, despite the sudden unease settling in his stomach. Ashley hesitated for a moment, the air thick with unspoken thoughts. Then she spoke again, her voice lower this time, almost as if she were testing the waters. "I've been thinking a lot lately, about us, about our relationship." Scott's chest tightened, but he kept his expression neutral. "Okay," he said, leaning forward, giving her his full attention. Ashley walked over to him, sitting down next to him on the couch. She set her glass down on the coffee table and turned to face him. For a moment, she just stared at him, her eyes searching his face as if trying to find the right words to say. "I know things haven't been the same," she began, her voice soft. "We've been distant and we've both been caught up in our own stuff. But I need to tell you something. It's been on my mind for a while now, and I don't want to keep it inside anymore." Scott's heart skipped a beat. He could feel the tension rising, his mind racing through 100 different scenarios. What could she be about to say? Was this going to be the conversation that changed everything? "I want to try something new, Scott," Ashley continued, her gaze unwavering. "Something different, something that I think could bring us closer again." Scott blinked, his mind trying to make sense of her words. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Ashley took a deep breath, her hands nervously twisting together. I want to try being with 2 men at once." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap, sending shockwaves through Scott's mind. His breath caught in his throat and for a moment he couldn't speak. He couldn't process what she had just said. 2 men? At once? Scott's mind raced, his emotions colliding in a chaotic storm. Was this a joke? Was she serious? He looked at her, searching for any hint that this was just some kind of strange fantasy. But her face was set, her expression earnest, and there was no sign of humor in her eyes. "Wait, you're serious?" he managed to ask, his voice barely audible. Ashley nodded, her lips pressed together in a line, as if bracing herself for his reaction. "I know it sounds crazy, but it's something I've been thinking about for a while. I don't know, maybe it's just something I need to explore. I don't want to lose what we have, but I also don't want to feel like I'm missing out on something. I just need to know if this is something we can do together." Scott sat frozen, the weight of her words crashing down on him. His mind was a whirlpool of emotions. Confusion, betrayal, anger, and something else he couldn't quite name. How could she even think this was a good idea? Was this something he could accept? Or was this a sign that they were drifting in 2 completely different directions? He felt a knot form in his stomach, and for the first time in a long time, he wasn't sure what to say. The idea of Ashley with another man, let alone 2, was something he couldn't quite wrap his head around. He thought he knew her, thought he knew what they shared, but this felt like a breaking point. He looked at her, trying to read her face, trying to understand what had led her to this point. "Ashley," he began, his voice shaking slightly. "This is a lot. I don't know how to process this. It's not something I expected. Not like this." Ashley looked down, her fingers trembling slightly as they traced the rim of her wine glass. "I know," she said quietly. "But I've been thinking about it. And I feel like if we don't talk about it now, we'll never get past the walls that have been building between us." Scott took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing thoughts. He didn't know what to say, how to react. His mind kept circling back to the same thought. How could this be the solution to their problems? Maybe it's just a fantasy, Ashley. Maybe it's just something you want to explore in your mind, not something we actually do, he said, trying to make sense of it, to find a way to bridge the gap between them. But Ashley shook her head, her eyes filled with a quiet intensity. No, Scott. It's not just a fantasy anymore. I want to make it real. The word struck him like a blow. He had thought their intimacy would heal, that they could rekindle what they once had, but now it seemed like Ashley was asking for something he wasn't sure he could give. Scott's thoughts spiraled as Ashley's request hung in the air. He didn't know what to say next, didn't know where to go from here. He looked at her, his heart heavy with uncertainty. How could they move forward from this? Was their love strong enough to survive such a request? Or was this the moment where everything would begin to unravel? For a long while, the room was silent, the weight of their unspoken thoughts hanging between them like an unbreakable wall. Neither of them knew what would happen next. The silence in the room was deafening, stretching on for what felt like an eternity. Scott stared at Ashley, trying to process what she had just said. His mind raced, desperately searching for the right words, the right reaction, but nothing seemed to make sense. The idea of Ashley wanting two men at once was foreign to him, something he never could have imagined. They had always been open about their desires and boundaries, but this felt like something entirely different, something he couldn't quite grasp. Ashley, sensing the distance growing between them, tried to close the gap. She reached out and touched Scott's arm, her fingers tentative, as if unsure how to bridge the emotional chasm that had suddenly opened up between them. "Scott," she said softly, her voice quivering with vulnerability, "I didn't want to hurt you. I just thought, maybe this is something that could bring us closer again. I don't know why I feel this way, but it's something I need to explore." Scott's eyes softened as he looked down at her hand resting on his arm. He had always been able to read her, to understand her, but this felt like a version of Ashley he didn't know. A version of her that was so far removed from the woman he had fallen in love with, the woman he had spent 8 years building a life with. "I get it," Scott said slowly, his voice heavy. "I understand that you want to feel something different. But this is more than just a change in routine. It's not just about sex, Ashley. It's about trust. It's about our connection, what we've built together. And what you're asking, it feels like it's breaking something between us." Ashley's hand trembled as she withdrew it, a tear slipping down her cheek. She wiped it away quickly, not wanting to appear weak, but the emotion she had been holding back for so long was starting to surface. "I didn't want to hurt you," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I've been feeling so disconnected. I don't know what happened to us, Scott. We used to be so close. I need to feel wanted again, to feel alive. I can't keep pretending that everything's fine when I don't feel like I'm being true to myself." Scott sighed, his chest tightening as he tried to find the right words. He wanted to tell her that he understood, that he wasn't angry, just confused and scared. But he couldn't shake the feeling that the woman sitting next to him was no longer the woman he knew. She had changed, and he wasn't sure if he could keep up with her transformation. "I don't know if I can do this, Ashley," he admitted, his voice cracking. "I don't know if I can watch you explore something like this with someone else. It's not just about the physical act. It's about what it means for us. I don't know if I can handle it." Ashley's heart sank at his words. She had feared this reaction, but hearing it out loud was like a knife to her chest. She had hoped that Scott would understand, that he would see her vulnerability and embrace it, but instead, it felt like a wall had been built between them, one she wasn't sure they could tear down. "I don't want to lose you, Scott," Ashley whispered, her voice trembling. "I love you. But I also feel like I'm losing myself in this relationship. I need to know if we can still find each other again, if we can still be who we were, or if we're just holding on to something that's already gone." Scott's heart ached as he listened to her words. He could hear the desperation in her voice, the longing for something more. He had always known that relationships were difficult, that love required effort, but he had never imagined that something like this would test their bond in such a way. "I don't know, Ashley," he said softly. "I don't know if I can give you what you're asking for. And I don't know if I can let go of the version of us that I still want. I still want us, Ashley. But I don't know if we can have it anymore." The words hung in the air, thick with unresolved tension. Ashley closed her eyes, a tear slipping down her cheek once again, this time unnoticed. She had never felt so torn, so lost. She wanted to feel desired, wanted to reconnect with the passion they once had, but the path she was considering was one that could shatter everything they had built together. Scott looked at her, his eyes filled with sadness. He reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. I'm not saying I don't want to work on this, Ashley. But I need to know that we're still on the same page. That we can still find a way back to each other without doing something like this. Ashley nodded, her gaze softening, though her heart was heavy with the weight of her desires and fears. I don't know if I can give up on it, Scott, she whispered. I need to know if this is something we can try or if it's something I have to do on my own. But I don't want to lose you in the process. Scott swallowed hard, the words getting stuck in his throat. He wanted to tell her that they could work through it, that they could find a way to heal. But the reality was far more complicated than that. He wasn't sure if he could come to terms with what she was asking of him. For the next few moments they sat in silence, the weight of the conversation settling heavily between them. Neither of them knew where they would go from here or if they could even go anywhere at all. The road ahead felt uncertain, full of twists and turns they weren't sure they were ready to navigate. But in that moment they both knew one thing for certain. The quiet between them was no longer comfortable. The distance had already begun to grow, and neither of them knew if they could ever close it again. Scott leaned back on the couch, running a hand through his hair, his mind racing. He didn't have the answers. All he knew was that the trust they had built together was starting to crack. And in the quiet of their apartment, he realized just how fragile their love had become. Ashley sat beside him, her heart heavy with regret. She hadn't meant for things to go this way, but the path she had started down seemed impossible to turn back from. Would they find their way back to each other, or would this be the beginning of the end? The silence in the room grew deeper, the weight of their unspoken thoughts hanging between them like a heavy fog, and neither of them had the strength to break it. The days that followed were a blur for Scott. The conversations had stopped, replaced with empty glances and half-hearted exchanges. Ashley's words echoed in his mind constantly, repeating like a broken record, "I need to explore this." He couldn't shake the image of her desire for something outside of their relationship. Each time he looked at her, he saw not the woman he had known for 8 years, but someone who seemed distant, unreachable, and filled with longing for something he couldn't give her. Ashley, too, felt the distance. She could sense Scott pulling away from her, his once comforting presence now a cold reminder of the divide that had grown between them. But she couldn't deny the gnawing feeling inside of her, the desire for something new, something uncharted. She had wanted this conversation to bring them closer, to open up a new chapter in their relationship, but instead, it had left them both feeling more lost than ever. One evening, after a long day of silence, Ashley found herself standing at the kitchen counter again, the same glass of wine in hand. She stared out the window, watching the darkened sky stretch out before her. The quiet apartment felt suffocating now, each corner a reminder of everything that was wrong. She wanted to fix it. She wanted to take back the words she had spoken, to find a way to undo the damage, but deep down she knew it wasn't that simple. Scott sat across the room, his gaze focused on his phone, but his mind was 1,000 miles away. He hadn't been able to concentrate on anything for days, each thought turning back to Ashley and the idea that had unsettled him so deeply. How could he move past this? How could they move past this? Ashley took a deep breath and put her wine glass down on the counter. She had to speak to him again, had to try even if it felt like it might break them even further. She approached Scott cautiously as if walking on thin ice, unsure if she was ready for what came next. "Scott," she said softly, her voice betraying the vulnerability she had been trying to hide. "Can we talk? Really talk?" Scott looked up from his phone, his eyes tired but still filled with the same sadness that had taken root since their conversation. He nodded, but there was no fire in his movements, no urgency to resolve things. It was as if they were both just going through the motions, too afraid of the consequences to speak the truth. "About what?" Scott asked, his voice flat, distant. Ashley sat down beside him, her hands clasped together tightly. "About us," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know I've said some things that hurt you. I know I've asked for something that feels impossible, but I need you to know that I never meant to hurt you." Scott sighed, running a hand through his hair. He wasn't sure he could hear this again. Every time she spoke, it felt like a part of him chipped away. But he stayed silent, his eyes trained on the floor in front of him. "Ashley, I don't know how to get past this," he admitted, his voice tight with frustration. "You want something from me that I don't know if I can give you. It's not just about what you asked for. It's about trust, about everything we've built. And I don't know if I can go back to that after what you said." Ashley's heart sank. She could feel the gap widening between them, a gap that was so much larger than she had anticipated. She had thought Scott would understand, that he would embrace her desires and perhaps together they could work through it. But instead, every word she spoke seemed to push him further away. I didn't mean to destroy everything, Scott, she whispered, her voice breaking. I need to feel something different. I thought it might help us reconnect. I didn't think it would make everything worse. Scott turned to her, his eyes finally meeting hers. There was a sadness there, a sadness that mirrored her own. But it did, Ashley, he said quietly. It did make everything worse. It's not just about what you want. It's about how it makes me feel. It's about how it changes everything we had. Ashley nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. She reached out and touched his arm, but he flinched slightly at the contact, pulling away just enough for her to feel the distance between them, both physical and emotional. I don't want to lose you, she whispered, her voice cracking. I don't want us to end like this. Please, Scott, tell me there's a way to fix this. Scott didn't answer right away. He looked at her, his expression softening, but the hurt was still there, buried beneath his facade. I don't know if we can, he said finally, his voice heavy with uncertainty. I don't know if what we had is still enough. I keep trying to figure out if I can move past this, but every time I think about it, it just feels like something's broken. And I don't know how to fix it. The words stung. Ashley felt as if she had been hit with a force she wasn't prepared for. The realization that Scott might not feel the same way about their relationship anymore, that perhaps they were no longer on the same path, crushed her. She had hoped that they could still find their way back to each other, but now she wasn't so sure. I don't want you to change for me, Scott, she said softly. I don't want you to do something you're not comfortable with. But I also don't want to feel like I'm living a lie, pretending that I'm okay when I'm not. I thought you'd be able to understand me, but now I'm not sure you can. Scott closed his eyes, feeling the weight of her words settle in his chest. I'm trying, Ashley. I really am, he said, his voice low. But I don't know if I can be the person you want me to be. And I don't know if I can keep pretending that everything's okay when it's not. The silence that followed was unbearable. Both of them sat there, side by side, yet worlds apart. The relationship they had fought so hard to build now seemed to be slipping through their fingers, and neither of them knew how to hold on. I need some time, Scott said finally, his voice raw. I need some time to think. I can't make a decision right now. But I need to figure out if we can move forward or if we're just too far gone. Ashley nodded, her heart aching as she fought back tears. I understand, she whispered, her voice barely audible. I just hope you'll still want me when you've figured it out. As Scott stood up and walked away, Ashley felt a chill settle in her chest. She had hoped for clarity, for resolution, but all she felt was emptiness. She wasn't sure how long it would take for them to figure things out, or if they would ever find their way back to each other. But in that moment she realized that sometimes, the hardest part of love wasn't just facing the truth. It was accepting that you might not be able to change it. The fracture had already begun, and both of them were left wondering if they could ever heal what had been broken. Days turned into weeks, and Scott and Ashley found themselves living in the same space but leading separate lives. The apartment, once filled with laughter and the warmth of shared moments, now felt like a cold, lifeless shell. The silence between them was palpable, each passing day making it harder to bridge the growing divide. Ashley tried to reach out. She suggested going to dinner, maybe a walk in the park, anything to reignite the connection they once had. But Scott was distant, his responses always polite but absent, his mind somewhere far beyond their home. Every time she looked at him, she saw the same sadness that had settled over him since that conversation. She couldn't tell if it was the weight of their unspoken words or the reality that things might not ever be the same again. One afternoon, after yet another quiet breakfast, Ashley stood in the kitchen, staring out the window at the bustling street below. The world outside seemed alive, people walking, cars passing by, but inside their world had come to a standstill. The once vibrant connection she had with Scott now felt like a distant memory, something that belonged to another time. Scott walked into the kitchen, his eyes tired, his face lined with the exhaustion of the past few weeks. He stood beside her but didn't say anything. He hadn't said much in days. Scott, please, Ashley said softly, breaking the silence. We can't keep living like this. Scott didn't respond immediately. He reached for a cup from the counter, poured himself some coffee, and took a sip before turning to face her. His gaze was distant, as if he were looking at her but not really seeing her. It was a look she had seen before, when things were fine, when they were in sync. But now it felt hollow. I know, he said quietly, his voice tinged with a sadness that almost broke Ashley's heart. But I don't know how to fix it, Ashley. I don't know how to get past this. Ashley's chest tightened. She had hoped, foolishly, that time would heal the rift between them, but now it was clear that wasn't going to happen. She could feel him slipping away, and every attempt to pull him back only made the gap wider. "I'm sorry," she whispered almost to herself. "I didn't mean for things to get so out of control. I didn't mean to push you away." Scott finally turned to her, his expression unreadable. "I know you didn't, Ashley. But I've been thinking a lot about everything you said. About what we've been through. And I don't know if I can move past this. I don't know if I can be the person you want me to be anymore." Ashley's eyes filled with tears, but she quickly wiped them away. She had to be strong. They both had to be strong. But the weight of his words was suffocating. "What if I don't need you to be someone else, Scott? What if I just need you to be with me again the way we used to be?" Scott set his coffee cup down on the counter with a soft clink. "I don't know if I can go back to that, Ashley. Not after everything that's happened. I can't just ignore how this has made me feel." The air between them grew heavier. Every word that passed between them only seemed to push them further apart. Ashley could feel the finality of his words, the realization that maybe this wasn't something they could fix. Maybe this was the beginning of the end. "I don't want to lose you, Scott," Ashley said, her voice breaking as she reached out for him, her hand trembling. "But I can't pretend like I'm okay with just staying where we are. I don't want to be stuck in this limbo anymore." Scott looked down at her hand, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something in his eyes, a glimmer of the man she had once known. But it faded quickly, replaced by the coldness of reality. "I don't know what to do, Ashley," he said, his voice low, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "I don't know if I can give you what you need, and I don't know if we can fix what's broken." Ashley took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. "I know you're hurting too. But we can't keep pretending that nothing's wrong. We've been holding on to something that's already slipping away. And maybe we need to face the truth." Scott's expression softened slightly, but there was no warmth in his eyes. "Maybe we do," he said quietly. "But I don't think I'm ready to let go yet. Not fully. But I also don't know if I can keep living like this." The words hung in the air between them like a thick fog. They were caught in a limbo, unable to move forward or go back. The space between them felt endless, as if they were standing on opposite sides of an insurmountable divide. Ashley's heart ached, the weight of the situation pressing down on her chest. "I just want to feel like we're fighting for this," she whispered. "I don't want to feel like I'm the only one trying." Scott closed his eyes, his breath catching in his throat. "I don't know how to fight anymore, Ashley. I don't know if I have it in me." Ashley stood there, her hands shaking at her sides. She had no answers, no solutions. She just wanted to be heard, to be understood, but the more she reached out, the more she felt herself slipping away from him. "I don't want us to fall apart," Ashley said quietly, her voice cracking. "But I don't know if we can fix this anymore." Scott didn't answer, his eyes distant once again. The distance between them felt like a vast chasm, and neither of them knew how to cross it. The conversation had only deepened the divide, leaving both of them feeling more lost and alone than before. For the rest of the day they moved around each other like strangers, their interactions minimal and forced. Neither one of them knew what the future held, but one thing was clear. The foundation of their relationship had cracked, and the pieces seemed too broken to ever be put back together. That night, as they lay in separate corners of their bed, the silence between them was louder than any words could ever be. The love they once had, the connection they had once shared, seemed to be slipping through their fingers like sand. And neither of them knew if they could ever stop it from falling away completely. In the darkness, both of them lay awake, wondering if this was truly the end, or if there was still some part of them that could hold on long enough to heal. But as the hours passed, the silence between them only grew louder, and the distance between them felt more final than ever before. To be continued? The days that followed felt like a slow unraveling for Scott and Ashley. The conversations had become fewer, the silences more oppressive. They shared the same space but lived in two separate worlds. The thought of coming together, of finding common ground, seemed impossible. Every glance, every word felt like an echo of the growing distance between them. Scott tried to go about his days as usual, but the weight of the tension in the apartment was always there, lurking in the background. He spent more time at work, staying late just to avoid the quiet house they once called home. When he was there, he found himself drifting from room to room, unable to settle, unsure of where to go or how to face the reality that their relationship might be over. Ashley, on the other hand, tried to fill the emptiness with distractions. She spent hours on the phone with friends even when they were no comfort. She began visiting the gym more often, not just to work out but to escape the feeling of being trapped. But no matter what she did, the hollow feeling in her chest didn't go away. She knew she couldn't outrun the truth forever. One evening, Ashley came home later than usual. Scott was sitting at the kitchen table, a pile of paperwork spread out in front of him, though he wasn't looking at it. His eyes were distant, lost in thought. When he heard the door close, he didn't look up. Ashley stood in the doorway watching him. She had spent the last few hours trying to ignore the painful reality of what was happening, but it followed her everywhere. She couldn't avoid it any longer. She couldn't avoid him. "Scott," she said quietly, her voice barely audible. He looked up, his expression unreadable. "Hey," he replied, his tone flat. Ashley took a deep breath and walked toward him, sitting down across from him at the table. She could feel the weight of the conversation they needed to have pressing on her chest. It was time. She couldn't keep living in this limbo, pretending like they could avoid the truth. "We need to talk," she said, her voice firm this time. Scott didn't respond right away. His gaze flickered to the paperwork in front of him, then back to her. "About what?" he asked, his tone still distant. Ashley felt a pang of frustration, but she swallowed it down. "About us. About what's happening between us. This isn't working anymore, Scott. I can't keep pretending like we're okay when we're not." Scott sighed, rubbing his temples as if the conversation itself was a burden. "I know, Ashley. I know. But I don't know how to fix it. Every time we talk about it, we just end up further apart." Ashley's heart ached. She had heard these words before, but now they felt different. Now they felt like a final admission that the distance between them was too great to overcome. "I don't want to let go," she said, her voice trembling. "But I don't know how much more of this I can take. We're just two people living in the same house, Scott. We're not really together anymore." Scott looked at her, his eyes filled with sorrow. He knew she was right. He had been avoiding the truth, but it was undeniable now. "I don't want to let go either," he said softly. "But it feels like we've been drifting for so long, and every time I try to pull us back together, it feels like we just slip further apart. I don't know if I can keep doing this." Ashley could feel the weight of his words, and for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to really hear him. They had been stuck in this cycle for weeks, both of them holding on to something that no longer existed. The trust, the connection, they were fading. And no matter how hard she tried to deny it, she knew she couldn't fix it alone. "What do we do now?" Ashley asked, her voice quiet, almost defeated. Scott's eyes dropped to the table. He had no answers. They had tried everything, but nothing seemed to work. "I don't know," he whispered. "I honestly don't know." The silence between them stretched on, heavier than ever. It was the silence of a relationship coming to its inevitable end, the silence of two people who had tried and failed to make things work. But then, as if on instinct, Scott reached across the table and took Ashley's hand in his. For a brief moment, there was a spark of the connection they once had. The warmth of her touch, the familiar comfort of being close to someone who had shared so much of his life. It wasn't enough to fix everything, but in that moment, it was all he had left. "Ashley," he began, his voice shaking with emotion, "I still care about you. But I don't think I can keep pretending like things are okay. We've been holding on to something that's not there anymore. And maybe it's time we let go." Tears welled up in Ashley's eyes as she squeezed his hand. "I don't want to let go," she whispered, her voice breaking. "But I don't think I can keep fighting for something that's already gone. I don't want to lose you, Scott. But I think we're already lost." Scott's heart twisted at her words, but he knew she was right. They had been lost for so long that neither of them knew how to find their way back. Their love, once so strong, had been chipped away by miscommunication, unmet needs, and unspoken fears. "I don't want to hurt you, Ashley," Scott said softly. "But I think we need to face the truth. Maybe it's time for us to go our separate ways." Ashley nodded, her tears falling freely now. "I think you're right," she whispered. "Maybe it's time." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The reality of what was happening hung between them, and neither of them had the words to make it any easier. They were no longer the people they had once been, two souls connected by love and shared experiences. Now they were just two people standing at the edge of something they couldn't fix. And as the quiet night settled around them, they both knew that this was the end. The fracture that had started so small had grown too wide to repair. The love they once shared had faded, and now there was nothing left to hold on to. The days after the conversation were the hardest. For the first time in 8 years, Scott and Ashley lived under the same roof but with no shared sense of purpose. The tension was gone, replaced by a quiet sadness. There were no more late-night talks, no more spontaneous laughter. Just the hum of their separate lives, echoing through the empty spaces of the apartment. Scott spent the next few days trying to focus on work. He dove into projects that had been piling up on his desk, throwing himself into the distraction of spreadsheets and meetings. But no matter how busy he kept himself, his mind always returned to Ashley. He couldn't shake the image of her, her tear-streaked face, the pain in her eyes when she had finally admitted that they were over. It was a moment he would never forget, the moment when he realized that sometimes, love wasn't enough. Ashley, too, had tried to bury herself in work and distractions. She filled her hours with calls to friends, visits to her gym, and nights out with colleagues. But nothing filled the emptiness she felt. She kept thinking about the day they had sat across from each other at the kitchen table, the weight of their conversation lingering between them like a dark cloud. It wasn't the way she had imagined it would end, not after everything they had been through. She had hoped for something more, something that could have saved them. But now, she was left with nothing but the broken pieces of a relationship that had once meant everything to her. One evening, after another long day of pretending things were fine, Ashley sat down at the kitchen table, her eyes scanning the room. The apartment felt foreign to her now. The couch where they had once cuddled and watched movies felt distant. The kitchen where they had shared countless meals together was just a space now, empty, cold. She had thought the silence would bring clarity, but all it brought was an aching loneliness that settled in her bones. Scott walked into the room, his expression tired but calm. He looked at Ashley for a moment, his gaze lingering. Neither of them had spoken much in the past few days. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, with the tension of everything that had been left unsaid. But tonight, Scott couldn't keep quiet anymore. "Ashley," he began, his voice soft but steady, "I've been thinking a lot about everything. About us. About what happened." Ashley met his gaze, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't expected him to say anything. Not after all that had happened. She had braced herself for the silence, for the finality of their separation. But here he was, standing in front of her, his voice filled with uncertainty. "I don't want to keep pretending like everything's okay," he continued, his eyes searching hers. "I know we're both hurting and I know we're both scared. But I don't think we can keep living like this. Neither of us deserves to be stuck in this limbo, Ashley. I've been holding on to something that's already gone, and I don't think I can do it anymore." Ashley's breath caught in her throat. She had known deep down that this was coming. The words they both had avoided were finally being spoken aloud. She had hoped that somehow something would change, but now she realized that it was truly over. The love they had shared was no longer enough to keep them together. "I don't want to keep hurting you, Scott," she whispered, her voice cracking. "I never wanted this. I never wanted to be the one to end things, but I don't think we can fix this anymore. I can't keep pretending that I'm okay when I'm not. I think it's time we let go." The words stung, but Scott knew they were true. They had tried everything: communication, therapy, patience. But in the end, love wasn't enough to heal the wounds they had both inflicted on each other. They were two people who had once been everything to each other, but now they had become strangers. "I agree," Scott said quietly. "I think it's time." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The finality of it all hung heavy in the air. Ashley felt as if the weight of the past 8 years had come crashing down on her all at once. She had loved him so deeply, so fiercely, and now all she was left with was the memory of what they once had. "I think we should start over," Ashley said softly, her voice filled with sadness. "Not together but separately. We need to find our own paths, Scott. We need to heal on our own before we can even think about moving forward." Scott nodded, his eyes distant. "I agree. We need time. Time to find ourselves again. I think that's the only way either of us will ever truly heal." Ashley stood up, walking toward him slowly. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly as she placed it on his arm. "I'm sorry for everything, Scott," she whispered. "I never meant for any of this to happen." Scott turned to her, his gaze softening. "I know, Ashley. I know you didn't. We were just two people trying to figure out who we were, who we are now. And sometimes we change. And sometimes that change means letting go." The air between them seemed to shift in that moment, the weight of their shared history hanging there like a quiet farewell. There was no anger, no blame, just an understanding that they had done their best and that sometimes the best thing for both of them was to walk away. "I think it's time for both of us to find our own happiness," Scott said, his voice gentle but firm. Ashley nodded, a single tear slipping down her cheek. "I hope you find it, Scott. I really do." With that, they stood there in the quiet of their apartment, the space that had once been filled with laughter and love now feeling more like a memory than a reality. Neither of them knew what the future held, but they knew one thing for sure: it was time to let go. As they walked toward opposite corners of the room, the finality of their parting was undeniable. It wasn't easy. It wasn't what they had wanted. But sometimes, letting go was the only way to heal. The door to the apartment stood open, and beyond it, a new chapter awaited. But for now they each faced the future alone, two souls forever changed but ready to move forward. And as the quiet settled over the apartment one last time, they both knew that no matter how difficult it had been, this was the only way forward.